I'm going to kick off then panel 3. Thank you, audience, for rejoining, and hope you have found the first 2 sessions useful. I think there's certainly been some really fantastic insights from the speakers, and very excited to be chairing this final session of day 1, and again a great panel in place. And really, I'm most excited about this panel because we're going to be discussing cybersecurity, but I'm really interested in the human elements to this. And when we talk about cybersecurity, everyone always thinks about technology, systems, machines, blah blah blah. But there's a really important human element to this, which I think will come out of this discussion. Looking forward to this. Without further ado, this is then assessing the cybersecurity landscape in 2021. Joining me, we have Catherine Parry. Catherine is the founder and CEO of DeepView. George Ralph. George is the managing director of RFA, very well-known IT tech advisor, worked with a lot of... Pardon?
You had an echo, I think, that's all.
Oh, I have an echo? Okay.
It's gone now.
It's gone now.
Oh, sorry about that. And then we also have Andre Pinar. Andre is the CEO and founder of C5 Capital, one of Europe's leading VC technology investors. So fantastic panel. I'm going to kick it off with Catherine. And Catherine, maybe you can give a quick overview of what you're doing at DeepView. And I'd like to ask you how you think the pandemic has changed the cyber risks that organizations face today, not just PE, but all organizations.
Thank you, James. Absolutely. So I think 2 of the most interesting behavior patterns that we've seen as a shift for is firstly the increase of WhatsApp and chat communications. So WhatsApp use went up 40% within the first 3 months of lockdown in Europe. And similarly, we were seeing the number of photos on Instagram with the hashtag work from home go up by 50,000 a day during lockdown, and today is over 15 million. Now, what do those 2 things mean? So you've got people chatting on unrecorded, unarchived chat channels, often talking to clients, talking about investments, talking to colleagues. So not only is there a security risk there because data is being shared, there's also a significant compliance risk there. Secondly, then going to the photos and videos that we explained, the information in a photo or video can get used for all kinds of spear phishing attacks and so on, which I know, James, we want to go into later, so I won't go into too much detail. What does DeepView do? DeepView is a single platform which securely archives and monitors social media platforms. So an individual can say, I've got 5 of my clients on WhatsApp, 3 of my clients on LinkedIn, 4 of my clients on WeChat, and they can select just the work chats for being recorded. So uniquely, we're able to record on corporate, BYOD, or personal devices, enabling the individuals to have access to clients easily. That's DeepView.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Yeah, this is an interesting area, Catherine, and I know you've got more to get into during the course of the next 45, 50 minutes. So great to have you on board today. George, what's your take on how you've seen the pandemic impact cyber risk just at its broadest level, and how you're maybe supporting your clients in this regard?
Yeah, well, as someone who's got just over 300 staff, I'm not going to start talking about managing people's mental health during the lockdown. We'll save that for later. I think the key focus really has been around the decentralization of cybersecurity, exactly what Catherine's talking about. It's not just the data and the way that people can kind of use synchronizations tools, this kind of disparate world of file sharing, but very much making sure that we're monitoring and protecting the users and the business data together. So a lot of what we've been focusing on is around securing the endpoint, not just doing things like anti-malware and antivirus, but using behavioral analysis so that we can pick up on things like bad levers, insider threats as well, bits and pieces like that. So the landscape shifted from the traditional, firewall and protecting the devices that are in the office when people come to work, into now shifting people's mindsets into, it's not just people working from home. You now have 100 satellite offices, basically. So shifting that to a decentralized model. And then on the data side, I think centralizing it. We've been doing a lot of work in the last year around data warehousing for people, so that all of these accessible systems on SaaS, for example, we can give them single dashboard views that are read-only. So there's a few initiatives that are going on. And then I think education. I know we always talk about sort of people, policy and technology and things, but the education of users, making them aware of what they're doing, exactly what Catherine said around social media and the risks of people communicating. The number of messages I've had on Instagram from clients, even though I have them on WhatsApp or email, is quite astonishing, actually. So the number of platforms of electronic communication is growing all the time. And so just managing the way that people use it and their education is probably the most important. Yeah. I'd say they're the top things. I could keep talking about the mental health bit all day, so I'm not going to go there yet.
Yeah. We'll come back to a few of these points, George, because the education and training point is very, very important. Andre, just an initial helicopter view from you. You work very closely, obviously, with some very leading edge cybersecurity companies. Just what have you made of the last 12 months, Andre? Just maybe on the back of what Catherine and George have just opened with.
James, the pandemic has been transformative for cybersecurity and has changed our cybersecurity environment completely, as Catherine and George indicated. And I completely agree with Catherine's point about the challenge of data leakage and also the challenges around privacy, as we all invited our employers and our business partners and business associates into our homes. And with George on the shift of emphasis towards the protection of endpoints. And I think all of this happened within the context of an acceleration of digital transformation and GPs really focusing on their portfolio companies' capability to do digital transformation, to invest in digital transformation, and to continue to function and work in this work from home environment. And this against a backdrop of an escalating threat environment, both from organized crime groups and from hostile nation states. So I think the pandemic has been completely transformative for cybersecurity, and we are still working our way through all the challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways that organizations, and in particular some of the bigger PE groups, are responding to this is by taking on the CISO role, so the Chief Information Security. I put my teeth back in. The Chief Information Security Officer. The CISO role becoming a lot more prominent, I would say, in certain areas. Not all firms are looking at this. There is another option, most prominently the outsourcing option. So I wonder, George, to what extent are you seeing PE firms think about bringing somebody on board as a CISO or going with an outsourcing solution? This CISO as a service, as it's now known.
I think it's very firm specific. A lot of the big clients we have, even traditionally, don't have CTOs anymore. And the CISO is the same. But I think if we're talking about the particular scenario we're in now, I think people have realized that there is a huge amount of work to be done when things go wrong. And, with all firms, whether it's your own staff or whether you've outsourced, you know, for us internally and for us with our clients, it's how we behave and react when there's an incident that's important. And I think what a lot of people are realizing is the CISO role is a critical part of a business, whether it's outsourced or internal, but it's also very strategic. You know, and I know Andre and I were talking before about the alignment of kind of the DPO and the CISO and the importance of the data integrity and data governance. But I think what people are realizing now is that potentially if they've had bad scenarios during this pandemic, the CISO is still reliant on another third party, whether it's internal resources or external, to actually get a lot of the jobs done, the processing, the incident response management, all of that kind of area. So what I've seen an increase in is actually things like the cybersecurity operations manager role, that kind of bit in the middle. So it's slightly less strategic. It's more about how incidents are managed, you know, looking at the kind of cybersecurity landscape of firms and how the actual technology is implemented. You know, I'm sure a lot of people know this, but there are so many products out there where you're taken in by the marketing because they do data prevention. But actually all it is a firewall in an office just logging everything. But if no one's monitoring those logs or has a dashboard and reviewing it, whether it's randomly or not, the point is having those logs. So that kind of area where people are actually taking action. And I think people are realizing that actually it's not necessarily a CISO they need, potentially could outsource like that, like they do with the DPO, data protection officer, but the actual day-to-day, they need someone to manage their cyber. So that's what I've been seeing generally.
Yeah. Andre, I'll bring you in because I know that you have a CISO at C5 Capital, Tessa Pereira. So you've gone down that particular route, but I guess again there are other options for firms to explore based on what George has just been alluding to there.
Yes, James, I think George is absolutely right there. The key here is to have dedicated resources to focus on managing the cyber risk, and to do that within the framework of governance that gives your investors, your limited partners, your regulators confidence that you've got your arms around this risk, and that when something bad happens, as is bound to in the current environment, you've got an incident plan around it and can respond quickly and rapidly. So whether this is a dedicated CISO, whether it's a DPO, or whether it's CISO as a service, I think all of those models are workable, and all high quality GPs today need to be able to work with firms like George and Catherine's and build them into their cybersecurity plan, not only for the GP but also for their portfolio companies. And how you structure that doesn't really matter. It's all down to cost and other considerations. And cost remains very important to GPs in this environment. The key thing is that you do it.
Can I just briefly ask, Andre, how you arrived at that decision to hire your own CISO, and maybe just point out for those in the audience that are maybe thinking about this, what are two of the key responsibilities that Tessa has at C5?
So Tessa is such a good CISO as a service that she really at the front end looks like a full-time CISO for us. But we appointed Tessa through an arrangement with one of our portfolio companies, ITC Secure, which is a managed service provider, and they've dedicated Tessa to us as a CISO as a service. So she is seconded to our team, but she's an ITC employee.
I see.
And we have found this to be a very good arrangement because ITC Secure continues to look after our cybersecurity arrangements, and we get monitoring out of their SOC and through their SIEM. And Tessa, as our seconded CISO or CISO as a service, leads that for us. And so I think in making that arrangement, the key thing we wanted to signal to as a GP to our LPs and to our portfolio companies and to our regulators is that we take this risk very seriously, and that we're going to invest in managing this risk.
Got it. Absolutely, and I'm sure it's something that the LPs are really thinking about very carefully now in terms of when they're assessing their portfolios of GPs. And this is a huge area of ongoing discussion, that's for sure. I'd like to dive into really getting a bit of deep insight here, so no pressure to the panel, but I really think it's important that we think about what some of the best practices are that PE firms really should be implementing today. It's impossible to keep up with the evolving cyber threat landscape. It's an arms race. We all know how this operates, and it's never going to end. But there are certainly best practices that one should be thinking about. And I'd like to lead with Catherine, just to kind of, again, expand on what DeepView are doing, Catherine, and you're essentially providing a social media compliance solution. How is that important to your clients, and how does that help them when they are looking to introduce best practices from a communications and data sharing perspective?
Thank you, Dave. So I think what's been really critical with the lockdown is, I almost sort of say the communications on chat has almost become like black market. It's a free for all. Before the lockdown, people were very much like, oh yeah, maybe people are using WhatsApp and other communications, but let's just kind of put that to the side for now, and maybe it will come up at another point, and are the regulators really looking at it? And now no one can hide the fact that they know their people are on these chat channels. And we've obviously seen the FCA take a couple of brokers to court. We've seen some of the big banks remove staff for using WhatsApp and so on. But what's been kind of interesting is the press backlash to one of the biggest banks firing. So Morgan Stanley fired a couple of people for using WhatsApp late in 2020, Q3. And the press backlash was, how can any current bank claiming to be up with the times and a modern organization fire people for using WhatsApp? And I think that summary was so articulate. That was in the Financial Times. So very clear. So the way to help is make it safe. Say to people, look, if you're using these channels for work, either stop today, as our policy says, or email the compliance team. They'll send you. So the way it works, we literally send the individuals a link. They click on the link, and then they take a photo of a QR code. It's a total of 120-second onboarding through the platform, and they select which chats are work. So the reason we've done it like this is it means that the employee is responsible for selecting the conversations which are work. Thereby, the regulatory responsibility is on the individual. And of course, within the platform, we've got all kinds of alerts to people selecting and unselecting chats and so on. So that's how it works on the personal and BYOD devices. And on the corporate devices, we can work through mobile iron and so on. But we're finding, actually, given the work from home concept, getting people to set up their own recording is the way to say, we don't want to be Big Brother. We want to respond to the needs you've got as an employee. You're telling us you've got clients on these chat channels. We now want to allow you to accelerate your network. Because really, I think what we're looking at with much of social media and chat channels is social media will be to email what email was to fax. There was a critical point we saw with email when the SEC and FINRA were asked how they considered email. Was it written communication? And then they said yes, and this was in the 90s. And that was the trigger point to all the written communication regulatory requirements being adapted to email. And we're seeing exactly the same with chat systems now.
Very interesting. I'm making some notes here. That's very interesting. Yeah, I want to ask Andre. Yeah, well, so just what Catherine was just saying there, social media will become to email what email was to fax back in the day. I don't know if any of the audience can even remember fax. I'm sure some can, but I mean, Andre, well, this is a big deal. I mean, I wonder, how you even think about this within C5 yourself. And I suppose really this is a way for firms, organizations to firm up their compliance programs by using maybe something like the solution that Catherine is offering.
Yes, I think being aware of the extent to which there is data leakage and the extent to which people use a whole range of communication channels in the current environment is hugely important. And then secondly, making sure you've got a solution around it that suits your compliance responsibilities, critically important. And I think part of that is also a cybersecurity evaluation of a chat channel that's being used or a chat platform that's being used. We encourage our team to focus on the available communication channels that we have with inside our secure systems inside C5, like Microsoft Teams. Mm-hmm. And I think all the high quality GPs at this point in time are accelerating their own digital transformation and their own cloud adoption so that they have the capacity and capability to provide more secure communication channels, informal channels outside of email, available to their teams.
I suppose really, I will bring George in a moment, but just quickly to Andre, because the whole rate of adoption of the cloud, of using multivarious different systems and solutions, APIs, some of which may be communication tools. This does open up a bit of a Pandora's box, doesn't it? In terms of monitoring, what your employees are doing and how they're being data safe and secure.
Yes, I think it's very important that GPs raise their awareness of where their data is going and have very clear policies that's well understood by their staff about the expectations about data control and the responsibilities attached to data that falls under the purview of the regulator. I think that's absolutely crucial because human inclination is to take data in all manner of directions without giving the data storage implications thorough consideration.
Sorry, Andre. Sorry.
No, James. I was just again going to emphasize the importance of having very clear policies, making sure your policies are up to date, and making sure that your staff, your team understand those policies. That's something that we've learned the hard way in C5 too.
Right. Sorry, and I was just going to finish by saying that, but an extension of that, and certainly understanding what those policies are at the employee level. A part of this is also not only being seen to be very much in control, as it were, in the eyes of regulators, but also in the eyes of your investors. If you're able to do, ongoing reporting and really sharing with your investors, any issues around cybersecurity, data breaches. This is all part of that very clear and transparent dialogue that you really need to be seen to be promoting.
Yes, I think when regulators look at this now, they're really looking for four things. They're looking to see very clear policies. They're looking to see that you have very clear processes and strong governance in place around this risk. They're looking to see whether you're providing regular and consistent training to your people. And they are increasingly beginning to evaluate your product stack, whether you've invested in best of class products to help manage this risk.
George, I'd love to get your thoughts on again, just going back to what Catherine was saying about the way that firms are embracing. Well, Catherine didn't exactly say that, but I'm now paraphrasing. But this adoption of multivarious communication tools and systems. I just wonder, I'd love to get your thoughts on how this feeds into the whole way that firms need to think about their risk management program.
Yeah, I was kind of nodding furiously in the background as both of the guys were speaking, but it's an interesting one. I think I kind of view it in a number of ways as someone who's helping clients with their due diligence from a GP and an LP perspective. And there are quite a lot of obligations around a regulatory perspective, right? So there's the reporting element, which Andre's touched on, but there's the ability to report, which is exactly why we need companies like Catherine's, you know, and then there's the kind of data governance element, which realistically, if you're a sensible business owner, you want to know where your data is, right? And then there's the educational bit that we touched on around the people. And I always try and break it down when I'm doing cyber training for clients to think about the three columns, you know, people, policy, and tech, and really think about it actually from a practical perspective. You know, the policies are the guidelines for the staff of what they should and shouldn't be doing and what's acceptable for the business, right? And that does vary from business to business, but they are also the guidelines of what people to do when the worst happens, right? It should also be a process that people can follow and all the staff are aware of. That's key. If you've got a 70-page booklet on a cyber policy, no one's ever going to read it. It's not actually going to be of any use. But those are also the documents that we need to provide for investors and regulators and things when they do ask, right? Then you've got the technology bit, which is everything we need to do to either gather the information, you know, whether it's a tool like Catherine's or whether it's our behavior analysis tool on the endpoint for the users or anything like that. You can't report on what's going on if you don't have the data. So the technology really, as I explain it to people or try to, is the sort of preventative element that we can do, and that's where you can invest a lot of money or not invest a lot of money. It depends on where your budgets sit in technology, but that is the preventative bit. And then the people bit is really both. If you've got uneducated users, it's going to be very difficult to provide information on what they're doing unless you've invested a lot of money in technology to track what they're doing. So the education of those users and making sure that they're really clear on awareness is really important. And then there's the kind of hidden components where right now we're not seeing anyone physically, or shouldn't be, just pretend I'm not in the office, where we need ways and means and tools in order to work out if we've got insider threats or bad levers, right? And I know Andre and I were talking about this last time. I've always made an effort when we've had new users who have joined in the pandemic to actually pop to their houses and sit in the garden and, you know, have a cup of coffee with them so that I can see them and get to know each other. And it gives me some assessment of what that character is going to be like working in the business, because they're then going to be working with our clients. And it's important for me to know that there's good integrity and trust there. But you need tools to work out whether you need to tell HR, you need to monitor that individual because they're looking at portfolio managers' spreadsheets, but they work in the admin team. So there's lots of areas on it, but I think those three pillars, when we're talking about best practices and going back to that point, James, those are the three focus areas, really. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's, and I know that this all feeds into, as I say, just building a really sensible array of best practices that firms really have to think about, especially given the changes that we've seen over the last 12 months. And, you know, I know that there has been a huge spike, you know, just in phishing attacks. And, you know, I'm sure the audience do ongoing training in this respect. But again, it's, you know, how do you monitor that when people are working remotely and out of sight, out of mind? It does open up a compliance risk that is harder to manage when people are not in the office. And I think it's really just part of an ongoing discussion that firms need to be having, not just with themselves, but with trusted partners like yourselves, George and Catherine. Catherine, do you, just on the point about phishing attacks, I wonder what your thoughts are on this rise now in sophistication, bad actors looking to steal people's, you know, identities and just stealing intellectual property just at a very broad level. Again, because people are so much now on video calls, video systems, using different communication channels. I mean, what are your thoughts on, you know, how that's really shaping up at the moment?
So it's it's been, with lockdown, so many things in our environment are so different, that we're learning the behavior controls that we need. And I think I like George's concept of meeting employees face to face. I think that's critical, because it reminds people of the human connection just at a base point, which the impact of that will be multiple, in terms of reminding people who they're working for, how to behave, and so on. But in terms of some of the specific things that we're helping clients manage, Instagram, I mentioned the hashtag work from home posts. The reason why these are such a problem on Instagram and LinkedIn is because what happens is a photo is taken. One of the most common phrases we see is, look at our little future trader. So little Johnny is by the Bloomberg terminal, and it's all very exciting. But because little Johnny is running around and we're posting this photo, we're not considering the Bloomberg terminal on one screen, the inbox with a response to a client on the other screen, and possibly some kind of document in front of the computer. And the amount of information we're seeing in photos and videos that external, as Andre says, external competitors, hostile countries, whoever might be using this for some kind of invasion into our organizations is a problem. So the way we manage it, we've built an algorithm that reads a photo, and this is computer machine learning, computer vision. And so it can recognize a computer screen, or it can recognize a document, and it literally will alert the organization to a photo or video that has confidential data in it, potentially confidential data. And so the organization can ask the individual to remove it before it gets used by external bodies that we don't want seeing this. So and those are public photos. We're really on Instagram and LinkedIn talking about people posting things very publicly, because to date, policies and education have all been around, well, what's in the text you're writing? What are you thinking about? Rarely have we been thinking about what's in the photos and videos, because the technology has not been there to manage it, because the size of the data in a photo and video is so huge to try and manage. It's not been done. Hence why we looked at this issue and are working with some of the biggest global banks on this. And also we have a couple of hedge funds that we work with as well, alerting them to the photos and videos. And then secondly, kind of moving on to how the chat systems enable data exfiltration, often inadvertently. And when it's considered almost like the black market channel, people use it very willingly because the behavior control just isn't there necessarily. And so a group of, say, group of deal teams, or they might be friends at different companies, all talking about some kind of deal that's going on, wanting to share information. They'll be taking photos and putting it on the WhatsApp group. They might be just generally chatting away about information that should not be in an unrecorded, unarchived place. And so just by setting up the recording, we're immediately putting in that behavior control. And that's really why so many of our clients, really with lockdown, we've seen a huge increase in the wave of people setting up. WhatsApp recording has been one of the most popular. Following that, obviously, WeChat we're seeing is a close competitor.
I think it's kind of it's like that old tradition of technology innovation where in the old days we used to just think of it as on and off. Right, you think about television when it was analog, you had like the smooth curve, but you could still see it, but it's a bit granular. And then when we went to digital, it's just like on and off. And I kind of feel like what we're trying to get across here, and Catherine's product is exactly into that. When people get used to using technology, they get complacent. You know, if people know that a tool has privacy issues, people still use it because they think, well, I'm just one in so many people. But in the old days, it was still, if someone did that, I'm not explaining this well, people would just stop using it. And I guess what I'm saying is the way that we've had to get around these problems before products like Catherine's came along was we would actually block the ability for people to take pictures on their work phones, for example. right? But we're as technology evolves, we're making things more granular in the controls, and there people can be more complacent, although they shouldn't. But the technology is preventing them from doing something accidental, like a picture behind them coming up, which is why I'm sitting like this, because of my whiteboard information behind me. As you said it, I moved this way.
These are, I mean, for any COO or CTO, CISO, you know, we're talking about things that we never would have thought about even just a couple of years ago, where, as you say, the whole way of now using technology that's really bringing everybody into one another's homes and, you know, personal spaces where there are potentially documents lying around. I mean, you know, you could have I'm just giving an example, but there could be, you know, a confidential, you know, financial document, Andre, on a desk, and we've seen this in the news. You know, you have politicians walking out of Downing Street, and people are taking photographs of documents that they're holding in their arm. I mean, these are risks that are real, and any firm today has to be aware that they need to think about how to mitigate these potentially serious, well, reputation risks, really.
Yes, James, I think it's important that when you consider your policies, that you also create policies for being on screen and in your work environment, and set some standards and perhaps do some training for your team on how to work in a operating environment. Something that's really important in the private equity industry and the venture capital industry is being able to communicate effectively, and certainly at the board level, with the founders we work, the management teams we work, to be able to exercise influence. That's always been much easier to do when you're able to meet people in person and discuss thorny issues or challenges that the management team is facing in person. Now you have to do it on screen. And so in C5, we've really said to our investment team, you are now in the broadcast business, and we'll have to train you how to be a news broadcaster or a current affairs program broadcaster, in terms of how you dress, your background when you go on screen, what are the things you should not do when you are on screen, and how you can best manage that environment. And one of the things, of course, which we consider is the privacy of the work environment, especially as many working mothers have to continue to tend to their children's schooling and education, but also the cybersecurity considerations. Are there things on your screen that will give away valuable information, not only to your counterparts on the call, but also to other third parties that may be able to access that recording?
Yeah. And Andre, I know that you've also, and what we're talking about here as well is again, it's how you manage your team in a remote environment where their home has become effectively a satellite office. You know, I'm in my own office here, and it's the same for all of us. But not only in terms of data privacy and sharing data in a secure way, it's also maybe using screen time to maybe better understand how your employees, your staff are feeling, performing. What I'm getting at here is that there's this risk now of the bad lever, you know, the insider threat that all organizations, large and small, have to be aware of, Andre. And I think you've focused a lot on this at C5, and you have an occupational psychologist there. This has been quite a big focus for you over the last 12 months.
Yes, the current working environment is tough. Professional staff, members of the investment team, support staff members, all have to manage multiple things simultaneously. Home environment, health concerns, and related issues. And then, of course, there's work. So it's a tough environment, and the best we can all do is to try and stay in the closest touch possible with our team and with our colleagues. And one of the things which we've done is to have a very regular all-hands call, and to have some of that discussion on an all-hands call in an unstructured way, so people can just speak their minds. And then we have a occupational psychologist, Rachel Frost, on our team who really tends to health and welfare. We've had yoga teaching sessions on our all-hands call. We've talked about mental resilience. We have a consultation session where people can just come and talk to the occupational psychologist. So I think many people have experienced a sense of being overwhelmed. To Catherine's earlier point, just the number of things that are pinging and making noises at you to get attention, and the number of messages that are flooding in, jumping between Zoom calls, which are ever more tightly scheduled. It's quite overwhelming. And then there's the rest of life. So I think staying close to your team and being in a position to understand what is happening in people's personal lives and with their health and well-being is more important than ever, particularly since the lockdown and the restrictions in the UK have gone on much longer than we all anticipated. And it's been a tough winter.
Yeah, and you know, I guess that's when people may fall inadvertently, perhaps, but they maybe do make errors of judgment and mistakes. And I mean, George, is there anything that you're doing to help mitigate this insider threat that firms have to contend with at the moment? You know, it is a serious point.
I think a lot of it is down to the way that people running businesses treat their staff and the way that they look after them. And I think, you know, we run a number of tools for our clients where we're doing behavioral analysis so we can check and prevent, right, which I talked about. But then we also run systems tools on the endpoints to look at productivity and the usage and consumption of applications. So we can actually work out how hard people are working from a week-to-week basis, rightly or wrongly. But for me, you know, I've probably spent a fair amount of money on sending gifts and things to the partners of my staff during this period, because it's hard for everyone. And, you know, yes, you can see how hard your partner works because you're all at home, and you can appreciate the effort that you both put into a relationship to work hard and earn the money that you need to get on with life or whatever. And I think sometimes people are underappreciated in the support they give to their partners, if that makes sense. And I think people are realizing that more and more. So I've been, you know, a lot of my guys and girls are young people working within IT that might have been in the industry for 5 to 10 years, you know, young families. Normally, one of the partners is a stay-at-home because they've got young children. And I think it's that person who's kind of getting missed out a lot of the time in terms of the help that they give to allow the other person to work long hours, especially in IT.
Yeah.
Not speaking from experience, kind of. And so I've been sending gifts to their partners and, you know, just saying thank you for supporting them during this difficult time, and just trying to be there for people, I think, is the most important. That's my sort of preventative measure for bad leavers.
Yeah.
And just trying to spend time with people, doing online games together and things is quite important.
Yeah. Catherine, would you have anything to add there, or any advice that you're offering to your clients as they, again, just as they look to, you know, try to navigate these ongoing risks that pertain to the whole point of data management and privacy and well-being?
And I think it's to both what Andre was saying with the workshops he's doing with the company, and George in terms of the presence. What is so important is putting oxygen almost into the areas that aren't necessarily focused on. So whether it's the partner that isn't cared for enough, or actually our mental health, because we're on so many Zoom calls, and actually with that, kind of moving it into the social media aspect, or the use of that, just putting oxygen there and just saying, look, We know you guys need to use it. We know it's happening. Just talk to us, rather than this kind of, our policy says you shouldn't use it. We probably know you are using it, but you probably shouldn't be doing it, which in itself creates mental stress.
Right.
Because everybody's kind of going, oh shit, my biggest client's just WhatsApped me, and now do I tell him to go on email? He's going to tell me to go away. And so really instead it's kind of going, right, tell us what you need, tell us how to do it, and how you want to use it, and let's put it in place. And really that was why DeepView was built. We saw, we literally saw so much demand of employees wanting to use these chat systems and social media to grow their networks, to benefit, grow sales. And so it was putting in place a very simple step to go, okay, cool, now we can, easy, done.
Yeah.
And actually kind of and that's exactly, as both Andre and George have been saying, that's also what the regulators want to see. They don't want to see kind of lockdown of everything. They want to see management of best practice and innovation, and innovating with products that allow solutions to work, rather than blocking it, and then you get the sort of black market behavior in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget, within PE, within any industry, there are younger people coming into the organizations, and they are using these tools, and you can't stop them from doing that, but it is training them in the right way, and just keeping the organization very much in good compliance health, really. And I mean, part of this as well alludes to this rise in employment fraud, especially with people hiring people online that have never met them. We are seeing now incidences of people being hired that are not who they claim to be. And I'd like to bring Andre in as we get towards the end of this discussion to give a couple of insights on some of the cybersecurity advances your portfolio companies are developing, Andre. And I know one of those is maybe looking to overcome that issue of ID verification, but I'll let you give those a couple of examples.
It's great to have an innovative company like DeepView on this panel with us, and George in a firm that's constantly looking for innovative products. Innovation is absolutely key to managing this risk, and a key part of innovation is automation. And so I think many GPs and their portfolio companies have traditionally done a penetration test once a year. We invested last year in a company called Synac that does continuous penetration testing, and also crowdsource a whole range of security researchers for penetration testing. And so I think in terms of testing your systems, moving towards a continuous system rather than a once a year exercise is one of the best practices that we see. One of our partners is Temasek, the Singaporean sovereign wealth fund that has a cybersecurity platform called Istari. And Temasek has implemented a collective defense solution through a company called iNet that we're invested in with them for the whole of their investment portfolio. So all the companies in their portfolio have the benefit of early warning if one of them gets attacked, or if one of them detects a particular nasty kind of malware. And that kind of collective defense, collective security for the whole of investment portfolio, I think, is also one of the best practices that we now see in the private equity industry. And
I think cyber in space is another area you're looking at. I wonder if that just touches on maybe that overcoming that.
We're very excited about the space sector and the UK's role in the space sector. And there's a very close connection between space and cyber. Space is the high ground for cyber from a practical point of view in terms of identity verification and validation, where we have to hire people in a virtual environment. Time and location, which is one of the key functions that we get from space and from GPS and GPS resilient alternatives, is absolutely crucial. And it's really crucial in terms of validating that people are who they say they are, and that devices are where they should be, and are not being moved around. And And there's now a lot of functionality embedded in products that we use on a daily basis, like Microsoft, that can really help you track time and location and make sure that you can reconcile that and verify that.
George, I know you have a thought on that, and maybe that's maybe looking ahead for how we'll see further advances in cyber security, and maybe, GPS verification, and really making sure that people are who they say they are, and they are where they say they are.
Yeah, I'm not advocating that everyone should do what I do and go and have a coffee in people's gardens when they join their business. But using things like conditional access, which Andre's talking about for kind of location-based authentication, is definitely the way things are going, especially now with people so distributed. And I think the way that the technology will continue to evolve from an AI perspective is just taking over the manual tasks of checking logs, getting exception reports. The systems will learn more about false positives, all of that kind of area. But I think the Microsoft tool set now, with the conditional access, already in the last 6 months, I've seen the policies and filters that you can set up on that just expanding week by week, new feature sets coming into the technology that's just off the shelf. So it's definitely the way things are going to go. Yeah. And at the moment, it's very easy to do from a device perspective. So you can set policies on the user and the device, but the local controls are applying all the time.
Yeah, Catherine, I'll let you have the final word on maybe how do you see the next year playing out for you at DeepView, and any final thoughts on what you would suggest maybe will be the ongoing evolution of keeping your clients safe and compliant?
So firstly, it's about keeping on board with all the new chat systems that are building up, so that we remain the single platform to every one of these channels. And then that makes our clients' jobs just much more simple. We have one archive, one feed, API or direct CSV file of all the chats into their data lake. It's managed, it's done. So people aren't overwhelmed by the consideration that there will be more chat channels and more social media platforms building, because we know there will be. So it's just about having a single manageable way to handle all this. And then the second thing that we're getting really excited about is the investment we're putting into our machine learning AI training. So we've got data scientists really working hard to make sure that we can tell the difference between a Bloomberg terminal and an inbox. Or one of the things we've seen most frequently, unbelievably, is with the work from home photos I mentioned earlier, is a password on the Post-it note. And that's stuck to the computer, because of course we all sometimes need reminders. And then a photo is taken. And of course, the external party knows the email address, because there's often a business card or something lying around, or the inbox. So really, we've got to continue seeing how these hostile other countries, spear phishing attacks are working, and keeping an eye on them. And at the moment, the most popular one is them pretending to be the IT team. Hi, I'm calling from your IT team. I can see your Excel is out of date, because in the screen grab, there's a little red dot by the Excel folder. I'm going to send you an email, jump on the link, and I'll jump into your computer and update Excel for you. Otherwise, you're going to have corruption when we next do a software update. And those types of calls with the data that's exfiltrating, managing that is going to be absolutely critical as we work in the future.
That's interesting stuff. We've run out of time. Fascinating, Catherine, and to George and Andre. I mean, this is such a lot to think about. I wonder if we'll move beyond passwords at some point. Maybe, I don't know, biometrics and some fancy stuff that maybe we don't have to all remember our passwords and write them on Post-it notes. Maybe that'll be a step forward. But a lot of so much to think about. And I'd encourage the audience to make use of the next 20-25 minutes to network with Catherine and Andre and George, and I'll be joining the networking myself. Just want to say thank you to everybody for sharing your thoughts on this fascinating stuff. really re-emphasizes the way that we're getting so much more embedded with technology today. And gosh, it's a lot to keep up with. And you've done a tremendous job explaining what you're doing at your respective organizations. So thank you very much indeed for that.